Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
And today we're doing a really an essential deep dive. We're looking at one of the most familiar allegories ever written to get at one of the most corrosive political phenomena out there.
The failure of idealistic revolutions.
Exactly. We are, of course, talking about George Orwell's timeless and frankly terrifying analysis, Animal Farm.
It is such a deceptively simple book, isn't it? I mean, you look at it and it's barnyard animals. But that first structural choice Orwell makes, it's maybe the most crucial. It's right there in the subtitle. A fairy story. Why do that? Why frame this incredibly dark critique of, Soviet power as a fairy tale with talking animals?
It's just a brilliant strategic move. It's a potent tool for analysis because it intentionally bypasses our intellectual defenses.
How so?
Well, think about it. Orwell takes these complex, ideologically charged political systems that are usually defended with dense academic jargon and revolutionary rhetoric, and he wraps them in the guise of a children's story.
So it makes it instantly accessible.
Instantly accessible, and it disarms you. You're not bracing yourself to read a historical tract about Stalinism. You're reading a story about pigs who learn to walk.
Right. It strips away all the ideological baggage.
Precisely. It allows you, the listener, to analyze the fundamental structures and mechanisms of power, the propaganda, the violence, the class division, without getting bogged down in debates about, say, economic theory or specific historical dates.
The dense theory gets distilled into something just visually shocking and universally understandable.
A horse being sold to the glue boiler. A pig wearing human clothes. The act itself, not the manifesto behind it, becomes the thing we critique.
And that brings us right to our mission for this deep dive. We're not just here to, summarize the plot, though we will cover the key moments. We're examining that relentless historical pattern of how idealistic revolutions, born from the purest intentions, are so often corrupted from within.
And our focus here is on the systemic mechanism, the how. How does the original oppression under Mr. Jones get perfectly reproduced by this new ruling class, the pigs?
That's such an important point. We have to emphasize that we're looking at the system, not just the bad actors. I mean, Napoleon is a monster, but the story is a functional model of totalitarian control.
It is. We want to understand how the tools of control, the propaganda from Squealer, the brute force from Napoleon's dogs, and the wholesale manipulation of truth, the constant rewriting of the commandments, how all of that functions structurally to keep the working class down.
Regardless of who the tyrant is.
Exactly. It doesn't matter if it's a man or a pig. The system is the same.
The story is like a perfect blueprint, a flowchart detailing the necessary steps for centralized, unaccountable power to really take hold. So let's start by rooting ourselves in the mind of the man who built this blueprint, George Orwell himself.
George Orwell, born Eric Arthur Blair, was fundamentally committed to two things: radical honesty and democratic socialism. His critique of the Soviet system, which is what Animal Farm is an allegory for, wasn't born from some conservative opposition.
No, it was a devastating indictment from within the left. He was fighting against dishonesty wherever he found it.
And he wasn't some detached academic observer either. This deep commitment he had to political truth, it was forged in the fire of direct personal experience.
And that transformation really happened for him in Spain.
For the crystallization, it was the Spanish Civil War. Orwell went to Spain to fight on the Republican side against Franco's fascists. And while he was there, he joined a militia called the POUM, which was a Trotskyist-aligned group.
Okay.
And it was there, within his own ideological camp, that he witnessed these brutal internal struggles. Specifically, the communist-led purges, he called them manhunts, against the Spanish Trotskyists. Friends of his were imprisoned, shot, or just vanished, all for being politically unorthodox.
Yeah. Wow. That must have been an absolutely crushing realization. That the enemy wasn't just on the other side of the trenches.
But inside the revolution itself.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And the key takeaway, the object lesson that really formed the foundation for Animal Farm, was his shocking realization that totalitarian propaganda could, and I'm quoting him here, control the opinion of enlightened people in democratic countries.
So people back in England were believing the lies.
Sensible, well-informed observers were actively believing these fantastic accounts of conspiracy, treachery, and sabotage that were being reported from the Moscow trials and then applied to his friends in the POUM.
So the betrayal wasn't just the lie itself. It was the willingness of intelligent people in free societies to swallow that lie.
And propagate it.
As long as it served a political orthodoxy.
Precisely. His conviction, which really solidified around 1930, was that the Soviet regime was not a worker's paradise in progress. It was, in fact, transforming into a new, oppressive, hierarchical society.
So he felt he had to do something.
He concluded that the destruction of the Soviet myth, that romanticized, untarnished image of the USSR, was absolutely essential if the true democratic socialist movement was ever going to revive itself. The revolution had to confront its own betrayed ideals.
That context makes the book's publication history almost as profound as the book itself. He wrote Animal Farm between 1943 and 1944. Now, you have to remember the global setting. Britain and the USSR were indispensable allies, fighting Hitler in the middle of World War II.
This timing created a political environment where publishing Animal Farm was an act of, profound intellectual courage. It was bordering on professional suicide.
Because of the prevailing orthodoxy, as he called it.
Yes. Particularly among the influential English intelligentsia, there was this uncritical admiration of Soviet Russia. To publish serious criticism of Stalin was just seen as politically disruptive. And as Orwell noted, such criticism was next door to unprintable.
And the resistance he faced was immediate and structural. The source material says the book was refused by 4 different publishers. Just think about that. A work of literary genius, refused not because it was poorly written, but because it was politically inconvenient.
The refusal from one publisher is particularly revealing. They had initially accepted it, but then they consulted an important official in the Ministry of Information.
And the official said no.
The official strongly advised against publication. His objection was pure realpolitik. He said the fable applied so completely the progress of the Russian Soviets and their 2 dictators that it can apply only to Russia.
So in other words, this is too accurate, and the accuracy is politically dangerous.
Yes. And then he added this layer of almost comical bureaucracy, saying that the choice of pigs might cause offense to the Russians who were, and I quote, a bit touchy.
A bit touchy.
It reveals the whole tension, right?
Yeah.
The pressure to protect an ally, even at the cost of intellectual truth and literary freedom.
This overwhelming resistance is what led him to write the preface, The Freedom of the Press, which is really the critical lens we should view the entire allegory through.
It's so important.
He noted that the main danger to free speech in England wasn't direct government interference, which he actually found surprisingly tolerant during the war.
Right.
The threat was more insidious. It was censorship that was largely voluntary.
He called it intellectual cowardice. And it's a systemic thing, not a legal one.
Yeah.
Publishers, editors, writers. They aren't worried about being prosecuted by the government. They're frightened of public opinion. Or, more specifically, the opinion of their peers and the prevailing cultural climate.
So if your opinion challenges the accepted narrative, in this case, uncritical admiration for Russia, you're not legally banned, but you're effectively marginalized. You just don't get published.
Exactly. It creates what he called a general tacit agreement that it wouldn't do to mention inconvenient facts.
He gave specific examples, right?
He did. The difficulty of publishing Isaac Deutscher's critical biography of Stalin, for one, and the widespread suppression of facts surrounding a Yugoslav leader, Colonel Mihailovich. He was censored and maligned in the British press because the favored faction, Tito's, was supported by the Russians.
So it was an inconvenient truth that had to be erased to maintain the narrative of the wartime alliance.
The press and the intellectuals weren't defending state secrets. They were defending a mood. They were defending the acceptable worldview, and anyone who contradicted it risked being ignored, misrepresented, or silenced with, as he put it, surprising effectiveness.
And this is why he grounded his entire philosophy in that quote attributed to Rosa Luxemburg, freedom for the other fellow.
For Orwell, intellectual freedom wasn't just the right to agree with everyone else. It was the right to say and print what you genuinely believe to be the truth, provided it doesn't harm the community in some quite unmistakable way.
Which gives us the devastating core thesis of the book itself. The novel isn't just a critique of Stalin, it's a warning about structure.
Yes.
Revolutions are fundamentally doomed to fail when the centralization of power trumps the founding ideology, manipulates the truth, and inevitably reproduces the oppression of the previous regime.
And the animals, after getting rid of the human tyrant, return to being slaves, just working for a new ruling class, the pigs.
And that transformation, that systematic corruption, is mapped out in the narrative arc with just surgical precision. So let's begin with that pure ideal in Chapter 1 with the old boar, Old Major. His message is so effective because it's so brutally simple.
It is. The animals' lives are miserable, laborious, and short. Not because the land is poor, but because of one single parasitic enemy: man.
He delivers a perfect revolutionary manifesto. He establishes the concept of exploitation.
Man consumes without producing, takes everything except the bare minimum that will prevent them from starving. The vision he lays out is magnificent, a future of comfort and dignity, all sealed by that inspirational song, Beasts of England.
Which promises a golden age of freedom and plenty.
A beautiful dream. And from this vision, the pigs codify animalism into the Seven Commandments. These are the sacred, unalterable laws of the revolution.
We have to note them because they are the legal contract that the pigs will proceed to just shred piece by piece.
They're the ultimate reference point. The first one: whatever goes upon two legs is an enemy. The core rule of solidarity. No animal must ever tyrannize over his own kind. And the absolute philosophical cornerstone, the final rule: all animals are equal.
He even warns them explicitly, doesn't he? In fighting against man, we must not come to resemble him.
No beds, no alcohol, no clothing, none of the human vices.
And yet, immediately after Old Major dies and the revolution happens, the cracks appear. I mean, before the cement even dries. The pigs, described as the cleverest, they just naturally assume leadership.
This is the critical, often unchallenged step in revolutionary corruption: the self-appointed intellectual vanguard. And you see the division right away. You've got Snowball, the idealistic, inventive intellectual. He's busy setting up all these committees: the Egg Production Committee, the Clean Tails League, and working on literacy classes for everyone.
He's the systems thinker, focused on broad uplift.
Right. And then you have Napoleon, the large, fierce-looking Berkshire boar. Not a talker. He's a strategist, focused only on getting his own way.
And what's his critical focus?
The education of the young. He secretly takes those 9 sturdy puppies away from their mothers and rears them in such seclusion that the farm pretty much forgets they exist.
That is a quiet but profound investment in institutional violence.
It's the preparation for his future enforcer apparatus. And the very first systemic betrayal of the core principles is about food.
The milk, it just disappears.
And the windfall apples. The animals assume they'll be shared equally. But no. They're ordered to be collected for the pigs alone. And Squealer, the Minister of Propaganda, is immediately deployed to rationalize it.
And his rationalization is a masterpiece of manipulation. He pivots from privilege to necessity, and from necessity straight to fear.
He claims they dislike milk and apples, but they have to eat them because they're the brain workers. Their health is essential for the farm's survival.
And here's the genius move. He links their self-serving consumption directly to the ultimate existential threat.
He cries out, waving his tail, "Surely none of you wishes to see Jones come back," by making the milk a matter of life or death for the revolution itself. The animals, who are terrified of Jones returning, are silenced.
So the principle of equality is replaced by the unquestionable principle of necessary privilege.
It's an act of rhetorical jujitsu. And this internal fracture, this contest for control, inevitably comes to a violent head in Chapter 5.
The big conflict over the farm's future, the windmill.
The windmill. Snowball wants it, promising electricity, comfort, a 3-day work week. He's got plans he drew from books like Electricity for Beginners.
And Napoleon.
Napoleon argues for increasing immediate food production. And the debate is vital because it exposes the political instability of the masses.
The working animals. They're easily swayed.
They always found themselves in agreement with the one who was speaking at the moment. They lack the tools to synthesize complex arguments. The decision just hinges on who has the loudest or the last word.
But the word is never spoken. The debate is ended not by a vote, but by violence. Napoleon, who's been kind of quiet about the windmill, suddenly lets out this high-pitched whimper.
And that whimper, it signals the coup d'etat. Those 9 fierce dogs, now grown into huge, terrifying animals that look like wolves, they bound into the barn and chase Snowball right off the farm.
The revolution, in terms of its founding ideals of open debate and equality, it's over.
It's over. It has been replaced by dictatorship, enforced by a private militia. The structural change is immediate. Napoleon ends the Sunday meetings, all open debate. Policy is now settled by a special committee of pigs, presided over by him, meeting in private.
And when a few of the younger pigs try to protest,
The new police apparatus, the dogs, they immediately start growling. Deep, menacing growls that silence dissent through pure, visceral fear.
and Squealer's right there to provide the ideological cement.
Immediately. He tells the animals that leadership is a burden, that Snowball was a criminal, and that loyalty and obedience are more important than bravery or questioning. He hammers home the need for iron discipline.
And this is where Boxer, the most faithful workhorse, internalizes his tragic new maxim.
Napoleon is always right. A perfect complement to his tireless work motto, I will work harder.
The use of force is followed immediately by the first act of systematic, widespread historical revisionism. 3 Sundays later, Napoleon announces the windmill will be built after all.
And Squigler explains privately that the plans were Napoleon's all along, stolen by the traitor Snowball.
And he calls this retroactive lie, tactics.
Tactics, skipping and whisking his tail into light. It's classic gaslighting of the collective memory. It establishes Napoleon's infallible foresight while framing the exiled opposition as a perpetual, secret enemy to be feared. The past has to be fluid if the leader is always right in the present.
The terror just intensifies with the rise of the perpetual scapegoat. And every misfortune, the windmill collapsing, missing keys, it's all blamed on Snowball,
Who is now said to be secretly frequenting the farm by night. And Napoleon plays the part of the vigilant, paranoid leader, going around sniffing the ground and declaring, Snowball, he has been here. I can smell him distinctly.
It creates this environment of total paranoia. Fear of an invisible internal enemy is used to justify more work, less food, and the paralysis of critical thought.
And this state of generalized fear culminates in the terrifying purges of Chapter 7. This is where the psychological manipulation reaches its darkest height. Squealer proves that Snowball was Jones's secret agent from the very start.
Even at the Battle of the Cowshed.
Even then.
Yeah.
Which directly contradicts the animal's clear memory of seeing Snowball bravely charge at Jones, getting wounded.
Boxer even pushes back on that for a moment.
He does. He insists Snowball fought bravely. But Squealer overwhelms him instantly. The wound was part of the arrangement. It only grazed him. The confession scene that follows, where the 4 young pigs and the hens confess to imaginary crimes and are immediately executed by the dogs, it's just pure terror designed to compel self-incrimination.
The air is heavy with the smell of blood, something unknown there since the expulsion of Jones. It's a visceral reminder that the violence they sought to escape has returned, but with greater efficiency.
The remaining animals are left shaken and miserable, realizing that no one dared speak his mind. Clover, looking over the farm, understands the profound betrayal. This wasn't what they aimed for when Old Major stirred them to rebellion.
And this terror provides the operational space for the systematic erosion of the founding legal document, the unalterable 7 Commandments.
This is where the lack of literacy among the masses becomes a critical structural weakness. The animals feel this creeping unease, they sense a violation, but they can't articulate it because they can't check the written law.
Clover asks Muriel to read the commandments aloud because she was certain the 4th commandment forbade sleeping in a bed.
But the written law now has a subtle qualifying clause. No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. When the pigs start killing other animals, the 6th commandment now reads, no animal shall kill any other animal without cause.
And when they get drunk, the 5th commandment suddenly says, no animal shall drink alcohol to excess.
The key is that the clauses are just added. They retroactively justify whatever the pigs are currently doing. And the psychological impact on the animals is devastating. Because they can barely read, they doubt their own memory.
Squealer just expertly gaslights them.
He asks, are you certain that this is not something that you have dreamed, comrades? Have you any record of such a resolution? Is it written down anywhere? And since the altered law is literally written on the wall, they have to conclude it must have done so. They blame their faulty memories, not the regime's treachery.
And this entire increasingly aggressive system is literally built on the back of the farm's most devoted worker, Boxer.
His unwavering loyalty, his superhuman effort, I will work harder. It stands in stark contrast to the system's ultimate, cold-hearted disregard for him.
And the system prepares for his disposal long before he collapses. You see the foreshadowing when the paddock that was set aside for his retirement with a promised pension is sown with barley.
For the pig's beer. The system consumes his future before it consumes him.
The most devastating betrayal comes when he finally collapses while hauling stone. He says, it is my lung. He just wants to recover so he can look forward to his retirement.
And Squealer promises that Napoleon has made generous arrangements for him to be treated in the hospital in Willingdon. But Benjamin, the cynical donkey who usually refused to meddle in such matters, suddenly gallops for the first time in his life, braying in terror.
Because he's the only one who bothers to read the fine print.
The vehicle that arrives isn't a vet's van. Benjamin reads the side for the horrified animals. Alfred Simmons, horse slaughterer and glue boiler, Willingdon, dealer in hides and bone meal,
They're taking the revolution's strongest, most faithful servant to the knacker's yard.
to be sold for profit, to be liquidated for cash to buy whiskey. The system has no use for loyalty that cannot be exploited.
And Squealer's lie to cover it up is just
Yeah.
flawless.
3 days later, he announces Boxer died happily in the hospital, whispering, "Long live Animal Farm. Long live Comrade Napoleon. Napoleon is always right."
But what about the van? Did the animals really forget that?
No, but Squealer has an immediate explanation. He admits, yes, the van did belong to the knacker, but it had merely been purchased by the veterinary surgeon who hadn't paid the old name out yet.
A plausible, immediate lie that just placates them.
It destroys their momentary critical thought and covers the tracks. And that very night, the pigs acquire the money for a case of whiskey. Boxer's death fuels their consumption.
And then years pass. The new generations only know the revolution as a dim tradition. Then one evening, Clover lets out a terrified neigh.
Because the transformation is complete and visible. The pigs emerge from the farmhouse, walking on their hind legs. Napoleon is majestically upright, carrying a whip in his trotter, the ultimate symbol of the oppressor.
This is the structural collapse, the absolute confirmation that the new regime has perfectly replicated the old one.
And when the working animals have one last moment to process and protest, the sheep, who've been rehearsing all week under Squealer's supervision, erupt with the revised slogan.
4 legs good, 2 legs better. 4 legs good, 2 legs better.
The intellectual capacity for critical thought is physically drowned out by the noise of the system's most obedient followers. And the final commandment, standing alone on the wall, encapsulates the entire corrupt system.
All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others.
The ideal of equality has been completely consumed by the mechanism of power.
So if we step back from the narrative now and look at Animal Farm as a political blueprint, a pure model of systemic control, the mechanisms become crystal clear. Let's start with that centralized authority, the pig-dog apparatus.
It's a specialized, ruthlessly efficient hierarchy. That's why it succeeds where Jones failed. Every actor has a specific, defined role. Napoleon is the leader, the unquestioned executive,
Squealer is the minister of propaganda and fact adjustment.
whose sole job is twisting every past and present truth. You have Minimus, the poet, the mythmaker, who composes the sycophantic praise, like that poem calling Napoleon the fountain of happiness.
And securing this whole thing are the 9 attack dogs, the secret police. Reared in isolation, they execute without question, ending all dissent with just a low growl.
They are the visible and invisible threat of state violence. And the centralized structure is, tragically, far more effective than the old human rule. Mr. Jones was a chaotic, drunken master. His men were idle.
But the pigs, as Mr. Pilkington later observes, are ruthlessly efficient exploiters.
They achieve a level of discipline and an orderliness that should be an example to all farmers everywhere. The new oppression is superior to the old.
And that efficiency immediately justifies the whole system of incentives and class privilege. The new ruling class has to demonstrate its separation from the workers.
Precisely. They live in the farmhouse, they drink beer and whiskey, they eat the milk and apples, they use the fancy Crown Derby dinner service, and crucially, they get up an hour later than everyone else.
These aren't just minor comforts. They're highly visible, symbolic markers of class distinction.
The revolution's failure is measured by how quickly the pigs adopt the physical vices and comforts of the deposed tyrant. And to justify this massive consumption, the pigs create the perfect structural mechanism, intellectual administrative work.
Right. Squealer explains their necessary labor involves mysterious things called files, reports, minutes, and memoranda.
It's a brilliant critique of pointless bureaucracy as a tool of class control. The source notes that these documents are immediately burned in the furnace. They are functionally useless for the farm.
Their value is in the performance of bureaucracy.
Because the working animals are ignorant of these terms, the mere mention of files and reports signals necessary, complex brain work, justifying the pigs' non-productive consumption and their separation from physical labor.
It's the illusion of complexity as a shield for privilege. And the system maintains itself day to day through a core narrative loop that balances privation with emotional reward.
That loop is driven by the dynamic tension between hardship, pride, and fear. When hardship occurs, and rations are often drastically reduced, which Squealer euphemistically calls readjustments, it has to be immediately offset by massive injections of artificial pride.
Where does that pride come from?
From ritual. Hoisting the flags, singing Minimus's propaganda poems, the spontaneous demonstrations where the gun is fired to celebrate some ambiguous victory.
And these ceremonies are explicitly designed to distract them from their empty bellies.
Exactly. And to reinforce the sense of honor and privilege in being the only farm in England run by animals, they are encouraged to feel superior, even as they starve.
But the underlying mechanism, the stick beneath the carrot of pride, is the relentless use of fear.
The fear of Jones's return is the constant club used to quash all dissent. Snowball, the exiled trader, is the perpetual internal scapegoat, blamed for every broken tool and every crop failure. The narrative is always, you may be hungry, but you are free, and if the pigs fail, the enemy returns.
You need a constant enemy to justify every draconian measure.
Always. And this relentless system inevitably culminates in that final dramatic reproduction of power where the system achieves complete circularity.
It starts with the erasure of the revolutionary past. The farm is renamed the Manor Farm, its original human name.
The skull of Old Major is buried. The hoof and horn are removed from the flag. All symbolic references to the founding ideal are systematically obliterated.
And then comes the structural endorsement. The meeting between the pigs and the neighboring human farmers, Pilkington and Frederick.
Mr. Pilkington, the old world oppressor, openly praises the pigs for the efficiency of their exploitation. He notes that the lower animals on Animal Farm did more work and received less food than any animals in the county.
That's the ultimate horrifying testimonial. The human oppressors endorse the new regime because the pigs have perfected the act of capitalist exploitation under the guise of revolution.
And that final ambiguous image, the one that ends the whole allegory. The creatures outside look from pig to man and from man to pig.
But already it was impossible to say which was which.
That is the ultimate structural collapse. The revolution hasn't created a new political order. It has merely allowed the new rulers to fully merge with the oppressive structure they overthrew. The crisis of perception is complete.
When we take this structural blueprint out of the 1940s and apply it to our contemporary political landscape, the patterns Orwell identified are, well, they're deeply unnerving. Let's start with the rise of authoritarian populism, which seems to follow Napoleon's trajectory perfectly.
Animal Farm is an essential roadmap for strongman politics, where loyalty to a singular leader, Comrade Napoleon, replaces democratic process or even the original ideology.
The immediate abolition of the Sunday meetings, the space for debate, and the swift, brutal purge of dissenters shows how charisma or just calculated brutality trumps reasoned argument.
And that unquestioning loyalty is sustained by manufacturing constant threat. The system needs enemies, Jones, Frederick, and always the internal saboteur, Snowball, to justify consolidating personal power and demanding extraordinary measures. The leader is the only shield against the boogeyman.
This reliance on threat leads directly to media manipulation and disinformation, Squealer's modern job description.
Squealer excels at using alternative facts. For instance, he reads fabricated lists of figures that prove prosperity has increased by 200%, 300%, or 500%, even as the animals are palpably starving.
And they accept this because they saw no reason to disbelieve him, especially as they could no longer remember very clearly what conditions had been like before the rebellion.
And that's the core mechanism of successful gaslighting in a controlled information environment. If you control the source and destroy the historical reference point, facts lose all objective meaning. The power is in the assertion, not the evidence.
Squealer's tactic of making people doubt their own sensory experience, are you certain this is not something you've dreamed, forces them to internalize the lie.
To believe the problem lies with their unreliable memory, not with the regime's actions. In a modern context, this is the environment where competing versions of reality are deployed to keep people off balance, doubting the very possibility of objective truth.
We also see the subtle, systematic erosion of democratic norms, starting with how dissent is neutralized. It doesn't begin with mass purges. It begins with eliminating the space for disagreement.
The dog's menacing growls that stop the young pigs from protesting. That's the perfect illustration. The simple threat of violence or even just social consequence is often enough to eliminate debate before it starts.
And this erosion then expands into the deliberate creation of noise pollution, symbolized by the sheep's bleating of that simple, meaningless slogan.
4 legs good, 2 legs bad.
And then 2 legs better.
The sheep are the perfect foot soldiers of the system because their function isn't to argue, but to prevent argument. Their constant rhythmic bleating drowns out crucial debate and nuanced thought. In modern discourse, this is the use of simple, aggressive slogans or manufactured outrage designed to eliminate the space for reasoned deliberation. Volume replaces sense.
Finally, let's circle back to Orwell's preface and its stark warning about voluntary censorship and social pressure. This may be the most relevant lesson for contemporary democratic societies.
This is so critical. Orwell warned that the chief danger was not the official ban, but the self-imposed ban driven by intellectual cowardice. Our current social, political, and academic ecosystems often create rigid orthodoxies.
And individuals and institutions feel compelled to suppress inconvenient truths or minority opinions, not because of a legal threat, but out of fear.
Fear of what? Fear of social consequence, fear of being marginalized, labeled unfashionable, or facing professional repercussions. This mirrors what Orwell saw with the English intelligentsia during the war. They actively suppressed facts about Mikhailovich or Trotsky, not because Stalin ordered it, but because they wanted to keep in with the bulk of the intelligentsia.
It's the silent, passive mechanism that clears the field for the dominant narrative.
It achieves censorship without ever firing a shot or passing a law. The system just creates the incentives to silence yourself.
So if we situate Animal Farm within our larger framework of crisis and perception, it becomes a definitive text for understanding how power controls reality.
The central argument is that power requires a fluid, controllable definition of truth, what we call truth instability.
And Orwell shows us exactly how that works. When the law itself, the Seven Commandments, is constantly and retroactively adjusted, the system destroys the very possibility of critical reference points.
If you, the working animal, can't trust the written word on the wall, and you can't trust your own memory of history, then you have no choice but to trust the word of the leader and his propagandist. The destruction of objective truth is the necessary prerequisite for total systemic control.
And the narrative demonstrates with painful clarity how systems outlast ideals. Old Major's vision was pure, absolute equality.
But the structure of centralized, unaccountable power, the pig-dog apparatus, proved far more durable and resilient than the high-minded ideals that launched the system.
The farm survives not because the animals are happier, but because the mechanism of control is perfected into a highly efficient, self-perpetuating system of exploitation.
Animalism was just a disposable tool to gain initial control. Once control was centralized, the mechanism of oppression took over and became structurally identical to the tyranny of man.
And linking back to the preface, the narrative shows the practical outcome of Orwell's warning against intellectual cowardice. The animal's ultimate silence, Clover's weeping inability to voice her protest at the executions, is the tragic result of ingrained fear and the systemic destruction of independent thought.
It's censorship achieved not by external decree, but by internal psychological collapse. The animals stop dissenting not because a law forbids it, but because the system has violently and repeatedly taught them that dissent is fatal and that their memory is unreliable. The absence of criticism is mistaken for consensus,
Which leads to absolute control. So we're left with this devastating revelation of betrayal in Animal Farm. It's the profound tragedy of a revolution that successfully expelled the human tyrant, only to install a new, more effective tyrant who learned and perfected all the enemy's vices.
and mask them with a revolutionary flag.
Right. And the book's enduring lesson, drawn equally from the narrative and the preface, is that the maintenance of freedom depends fundamentally on intellectual courage.
It's the courage to insist on the right, to criticize the powerful, even when it's politically or socially inconvenient. The courage to tell people what they do not want to hear and to refuse to participate in the deliberate falsification of history.
The ultimate cautionary note is in that final horrible scene with Boxer. It shows the terrifying power of organized lying over basic, visceral reality. Despite all the evidence, the stench of blood, the reduced rations, the pig's self-privileged Boxer's comrades were willing to believe Squealer's explanation for the knacker's van.
They swallowed the lie that the sign Alfred Simmons, Horse Slaughter, and Glue Boiler was just an unpainted logo on a repurposed vet's van. That willingness to accept a completely implausible official falsehood over what their own eyes and ears told them, that is the terrifying power of a totalitarian system.
So what instinct, then, must we actively guard every single day to ensure we know what is or is not dangerous in our own society?
The instinct to check the writing on the wall, to trust our own eyes and memory, even when the chorus of sheep is bleating loudly that we are wrong.
We credit the lasting genius of George Orwell for this crucial, timeless work of structural analysis.
We encourage you to read the book yourselves, support the author, or borrow it from your local library.
For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer linked in the description.
If you enjoy systems-level analysis like this, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.